Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy folks, and welcome to this video where we are going to take a look at an article that came across my newsfeed from the Financial Times about Warhammer. Now, yes, it's about Warhammer, but I think that what the content of the article is going to cover will apply to any war game. It just so happens that this one's looking at Warhammer because Warhammer is, without question, the largest of the tabletop miniature wargaming companies. And to have an article in the Financial Times, I mean, this isn't a gaming journal, this isn't a tabloid, this isn't someone's blog. Like, this is a major publication that looks at finances, economics, business decisions, and they've decided to write an article about Warhammer. So I just read the title and enough of the first paragraph just to get an idea of what they're looking at. And the question that they're looking at is, how has this gaming company grown so much that it's now considered blue chip stock, which I believe happened earlier this year, but it hit the point on the London Stock Exchange where it is now ranking up there with major companies that are considered, I wouldn't say a sure bet, but it's like buying stock in Coca-Cola or Microsoft. It's pretty safe that it's going to do well. So let's take a look at the article. This is completely fresh. I have not looked at it any more than just the title in the first paragraph to get an idea of what's happening. So I'm going to be reading this along with you guys. So let's take a look at what it says. Let's see what kind of reactions, let's see what kind of information, what kind of arguments are made, and we'll see how well this applies to other games such as one-page rules, games like Bolt Action, Conflict 47, skirmish games, all that kind of stuff. Well, let's see if what is covered in this article is specific to Warhammer, or if what made Warhammer so big and so popular could also apply to other games. So let's check it out. Okay, so here we are with the article title. Financial Times, How Warhammer Won. Subtitle, The maker of the fantasy figurine game is now valued at £5.25 billion. What keeps the battle raging on? So my initial reaction right off the top is the title doesn't make sense. How Warhammer Won. Well, what are you talking about? The company is Games Workshop, and even if you say Warhammer, are you talking Warhammer 40k, Warhammer Fantasy Battles, or, which, doesn't exist anymore, but Warhammer the Old World, Warhammer Age of Sigmar? They kind of have fallen into that trap, or maybe that was intentional, of when Games Workshop is trying to rebrand themselves as Warhammer. Remember, they renamed all their retail stores. They're not Games Workshop stores anymore. They're now Warhammer stores. Or that time when Games Workshop tried to refer to the Warhammer hobby. Not the tabletop gaming hobby, but the Warhammer hobby. And for any of you who watch Discourse, she had a really good video about why that's a really crappy thing to do, is to try and rename Warhammer the game as Warhammer the hobby. But we're getting a bit off topic. So right off the bat here, that seems like something that someone who's not very familiar with the game would say. So maybe that's why it says it. But they'd asked an interesting question. This company is now valued at over £5 billion, which, my math, I don't know. I'm guessing that's probably between 7, 8, 9 billion US. Maybe more. I don't think the pound is double. Anyways, the question, what keeps the battle raging on? And that's a very good question. So let's take a look at what it says here. So the credit, of course, here to Chris, Chris Allnut, photographed by Peter Flood. Flood? My apologies. Okay, so it starts off saying, war is raging on London's Holloway Road. Spindly tree spirits known as the Sylvanath are clashing with hulking giants from the Sons of Behemat. Swarms of flying insectoid cavalry have launched an attack from behind a rocky outcrop. In retaliation, a man-crusher Gargant, a brute of a warrior, is charging a grove of magical trees. Okay, so we're going with, here's the hook. It's an article in the Financial Times, so you're expecting it to be leading with stock reports and prices and things like that. But no, we're going to go with the hook. Okay, great. The belligerents are less scary than they sound. They are painstakingly painted plastic Warhammer Age of Sigmar figurines at a dainty scale of around 1/56. I don't call them dainty, please. Of all the things you're going to call Warhammer miniatures, don't call them dainty. And on that note, at the top here, when it says figurines, These are not figurines, my good sir. These are models or miniatures. You buy them, you build them, you have to paint them. Figurines, that's like G.I. Joe. They're already built, they're already painted, and you just rip them out of the package and play with them. All right, maybe a little picky on my part, but let's continue on here. The players, TV director Cole McCarthy and software engineer George Seymour, are maneuvering them over carefully placed pints in the... maneuvering them over carefully placed pints. I thought they're talking about terrain. I'm like, what the heck is a pint? Got it. They're drinking while they're playing. In the newly opened North London outpost of tabletop games venue Bad Moon Cafe. The pair are usually teammates, but have opted to fight one-on-one so that McCarthy, best known for his work on Peaky Blinders, can test out strategies with his giants. Now that statement there, that's pretty cool. I always like to hear when someone who's higher up in entertainment plays these kinds of games and hobbies, because it means they're becoming more well-known, more widespread, more acceptable. Henry Cavill is the golden boy of Warhammer, but that's just because, he's dashing and handsome and has the, physique of a Greek god. And that's why he always gets a lot of the attention. But when you have individuals like this, as a director, they said, of Peaky Blinders, that was a really good show. Or when you have, it's either Matt Stone, Trey Parker, or both of them, they play too. When you have celebrities and people higher up within the entertainment industry play a game like this, it starts to get people used to not thinking of it as something for kids, teenagers, or folks who just never grew up. That this is a legitimate hobby that people with serious careers, who have serious education. I mean, this guy's a software engineer, a TV director, and on the side they play this. Okay, so let's move on here. So he says, this is a new army for me, and I'm playing it a wee bit skew-whiff, he chuckles. I'm playing it a wee bit skew-whiff. Someone's going to have to translate that for me. And his attack on Seymour's trees failed due to bad dice rolls. Well, clearly, whoever wrote this article doesn't know about the dice gods. So here we've got a picture of the owner of the Bad Moon Cafe setting up. You can see in the background, they look like at least a half a dozen tables. And there's a second row there, so this looks like a very big cafe. Almost looks like it was built inside an old, not a bunker, what's the word I'm looking for? An air hangar. Anyways, we got a nice game set here. Okay. Boxes along the wall display copies of the game spawned by the Warhammer franchise, its name originally inspired by the weapons in the English sci-fi and fantasy writer Michael Moorcock's books written in the 1960s and 70s. Now, when I found that out, that the whole idea of chaos and the 8-pointed star and all that came from Michael Moorcock's books, I read the first one. The first, I don't know, it was Chronicles of Melniboné, something like that. The very, very, very first one. It was interesting because I read it and it seemed like kind of a letdown. There was nothing fancy in it. There was nothing really eye-catching. It actually read like I was reading someone's D&D adventure. And so at first I was a little let down to think, this is the foundation of Warhammer lore and all that good stuff. But then I remembered that at the time, this was new. This was cutting edge. This was unique. It's like the first time I read Isaac Asimov. And I read through his Foundation series and I thought, what's so great about this? It has all the tropes and cliches of science fiction. And then I remembered, oh yeah, he's the guy who invented all of these tropes and cliches. So if you've never read any of Michael Moorcock's books and you're a big Warhammer fan, you might want to give it a try because there'll be some interesting stuff in there. All right, let's continue. Its popularity extends far beyond the tabletop. It now spans hundreds of books, several dozen video games, an official magazine, and currently in the works, in collaboration with Amazon Studios, to produce a live-action film and TV shows starring and produced by Superman actor Henry Cavill. Well, that's the scuttlebutt, but how long has this been in negotiation and development, and we still haven't heard anything, so I don't know. Maybe the wheels of Amazon and Hollywood turn a lot slower these days. Last year, Warhammer's creator, Games Workshop, entered the FTSE 100 index of the largest listed companies in the UK for the first time. And I did a video about that the day that happened. It has since outgrown the market capitalization of companies such as EasyJet and JD Sports. Now, I'm sure those of you who are across the pond in Britain know those companies a little bit more than here in the United States, but if you're on the FTSE 100 index, that means you're a major company. Today, it's valued at £5.25 billion, with Warhammer by far its biggest brand. And while its games are still designed and made in Nottingham, around 70% of sales come from outside the UK. The company now owns 201 stores in North America, and of last year, its first in Switzerland. So someone finally managed to break the Swiss defenses, and it was Games Workshop. So we got some pictures here of the typical gaming store on the right here. We got this painted War Chanter here on the left. Looks like the dry brushing got a little bit too much of his fingers, but overall, that's still a pretty solid paint job. Okay, Games Workshop is one of the purest forms of vertical integration you'll find in the consumer business model. Okay, here we're getting to the kind of stuff you would expect to see in the Financial Times. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what vertical integration is, it's the process or the system by which a company controls all of the steps of production, from raw resource to finished product being marketed to customers. So think, for example, like McDonald's. McDonald's, if it were to vertically integrate, they wouldn't just own restaurants, they would own beef cattle ranches, they would own lettuce patches, tomato farms, they'd own trucking companies. They would own every step that they need to go from raw resources to burgers being sold. So in this case, they're saying Games Workshop, that's one of its strengths, is this idea of vertical integration, from product design to production to transport to selling. It's all under the Warhammer brand, which means every time there's money being made, it's all going back into the same company. With the exception of shipping, they do contract with either FedEx or UPS or something like that. But they produce their own models, design their own models, and have the retail stores to sell their own models. So let's see what else he says. That's what says Jason Andrew, co-founder of financial services firm Arbor Group and a Warhammer collector since the age of 12. So here you go. You have another individual in a profession, a financial services advisor firm, and also a Warhammer enthusiast since the age of 12. They design the IP, manufacture the product, control the retail experience, and own the distribution. And we'll see what they say about that, because that's one of the things that sometimes Warhammer players complain about. It's just how much control they have over the whole thing. It is their product, but, you know. New expansions, rules updates, and proprietary miniatures, meanwhile, ensure repeat purchases from players. Oh, yes, they do. Like when you re-release the rule set every 3 years and force your players to rebuy all their codexes. Yeah. Although I don't know if that's brilliant business model, that's really crappy customer service. But let's move on. That's what makes it a money printing machine. Yes, because it's a codex printing machine. Anyways, that's what he adds. It's easy to forget that behind the lucrative franchise is a fierce obsession with a game of miniatures. Players don't just buy a product, he explains. They join a cult or lifestyle. Okay, don't call it a cult. It's not a religion. Lifestyle, yes. Gaming culture, absolutely. Very, I don't know if I call tight-knit, but a very defined community, yes. But don't call it a cult. Come on now. Still, he has a point. You're not just buying figures. This isn't like Funko Pop, where you buy them to collect them and put them on your shelf. This is a hobby that's also a game that has a well-established lore that's branching out into movies. Like, he's right that it is a lifestyle or a culture, but it's not a cult. Culture, not cult. So Games Workshop, the article continues, was founded by 3 flatmates in London in 1975. From their home in Shepherd's Bush, they sold handmade wooden backgammon and Go sets and published a monthly newsletter about board games. Circulation, just over 200 by February 1976. Then we have this very interesting quote that just, obviously we'll get the context of it in a bit, but Warhammer clearly started as a satire of Thatcherism, says Thomas Arnold, assistant professor of philosophy, University of Heidelberg. I don't know if I would agree the entirety of the game and everything about it was a satire of Thatcherism. Games Workshop started in the age when games like Dungeons & Dragons were first getting their start, where there was this fascination by us nerds with fantasy and sword and sorcery and high fantasy, all that kind of thing. Now, absolutely, anyone who has played Warhammer and is familiar with the orcs knows that Ghazghkull, one of the most famous characters in all of Warhammer 40k, and one of the most important characters in the orc faction, his full name is Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka. It's Ghazghkull Margaret Thatcher. So that definitely is a satire. So kind of interesting that they decided to make this character, this horrible, awful, barbaric orc, a satire of Britain's politicians in the 1980s. I wonder if what they think about it with the fact that Ghazghkull has become one of the most, I don't know if I'd say beloved, but one of the most beloved characters in the entire franchise. Everybody loves Ghazghkull Thraka. So let's see what the quote context is here. After 3 years, Games Workshop co-founded Citadel Miniatures, a company selling small metal models for war games. The first Warhammer game, Warhammer Fantasy Battles, was published in 1983 and used these quote-unquote minis, as they're termed, to enact bouts of medieval warfare on the tabletop battlefield. Okay, how is that a satire of Thatcherism? They're absolutely right. It started as like a D&D writ large. Instead of one character going through a dungeon on an adventure, you now have an army. Like it's wargaming. That's not a satire of Thatcherism. Characters were, but not the whole thing. Anyways, Warhammer 40k, a bellicose sci-fi saga set tens of thousands of years in the future, followed in 1987. Born amid the division and decay of 1980s Britain, it was an immediate hit. Warhammer clearly started as a satire of certain strains of Thatcherism, including the callousness and disregard toward the poor, says Thomas Arnold, assistant professor of philosophy at University of Heidelberg and co-organizer of the annual Warhammer Conference, the world's first academic gathering dedicated to the game. Okay, well, professors for a living make arguments that they very strongly adhere to, but fortunately no one else has to agree with them. So I think this is kind of ironic if we want to fast forward. If Warhammer started showing callousness and disregards towards the poor, they're doing a fantastic job of continuing that trend in 2025 when the game has become so expensive that nobody can afford to play it unless they're either going to go into debt, they're either going to sacrifice food, or they've got a very, very solid middle class or upper class job. I mean, how many kids do you know of who get interested at the age of 12, like one of the guys mentioned in this article, who's going to be able to cough up the $500 to buy an army, paints, tools, and all the stuff you're going to need, books, codices, to play the game? So I find that ironic, that if the game really was meant to be some kind of political shot at Thatcherism, it has become the very thing that it attempted to take a shot at. So I'm not sure I totally buy into Professor Arnold's argument here, at least not to the degree that he's making it. I don't know, what do you guys think? When you played Warhammer, did you feel like you were engaging in political discussion of 1980s Britain? I doubt it. Cool picture here of some old school models here. What does it say? The caption is "A Night Battles in Warhammer: The Old World," care of copyright Peter Flood. Okay, today Warhammer 40k is still the most popular of Games Workshop's games, and the artistry behind it has remained much the same too. Beginners can visit one of the company's 560 shops across the world, learn to play, and start painting their first model for free. True. Having neither played nor painted before, okay, that explains some of the usage of language and terminology. This author here is completely new to this. I drop into a shop in Guildford, Surrey, to join a handful of adults and teenagers on a Saturday morning. Over the course of a couple hours, I learned it takes you hours to learn how to cut the plastic pieces of a Warhammer 40k Space Marine cleanly from the wire frame, put them together, and paint them. Okay, I used to work at a Games Workshop. I was an on-call employee there. A demo to teach them how to cut out the pieces, build, and paint does not take hours, unless it was a really, really busy day. Less than an hour. It has to be less than an hour. But anyways, that's beside the point. The point is, at least as a good journalist, he went down and he tried out the product that he's supposed to be reporting on. So, let's continue. Miniatures arrive gray and lifeless. Well, don't tell that to like the 50% of players that put them on the tables. Turning them into playable pieces means, at the least, devising a matching uniform for your army. At its best, it means light, texture, depth. In short, turning a model into a character with a story. Now, I like that. That's interesting that he's never played before, and yet he understands that part of the draw to this game is you're not just painting figures to put on a table. That's what chess is. Nobody ever names their chess pieces. They're just pieces. But when people start to build and paint and create their armies, they start to get attached and emotionally connected to them. That's why folks have trouble selling armies, even if they don't play them anymore. If they put a lot of effort into building and painting them, there's that kind of emotional bond with it. Not to, sound kind of squishy here. Okay. I opt for Leadbelcher silver for the majority of the armor with Balthazar gold detailing. So you've made metal armor with gold trim. Bless you, sir, for being original. When these have dried, a watered-down earthshade helps add a realistic touch of dirt to their gleaming getup. This attention to detail isn't optional. Games Workshop's own events stipulate that all miniatures must be painted to a battle-ready standard. At Adepticon, the annual wargaming convention held in the Midwest United States, you should specify, because you, sir, are going to a store in Surrey, the rules specify a 3-color minimum standard. And I've also had a video where I talk about painting miniatures and the pros and cons of the tabletop standard. Got another picture here of lots of product on the shelf and beginning to paint a character. What's very ironic is in the background here, I don't think that's a GW color. Maybe it is, but these don't look like GW paints. Anyway, let's move on here. When you finish painting, you can start to play. Not true. When you finish building, you can start to play. There's nothing wrong with playing with gray models if you're just getting into the hobby and you really want to get some game time in. Now, when I used to live in Arizona and I went to the Games Workshop store there, and at the time it was still called Games Workshop, they did forbid you to play unless your models were painted. And at the time I was still young and didn't have much of a spine, and so I hurried home and painted a bunch of stuff really crappy just to meet their standards. Today, I'd have told them what they could have done with their unpainted models and gone to a different store. So I know today you can play in a Games Workshop or a Warhammer store with gray. There is nothing wrong with it. Now, if you're still playing with the same models in gray 10 years down the road, that's different. Okay, at its most basic, reads the 40K rulebook. Stop calling it the 40,000 rulebook, man. The game involves 2 players bringing their collections of Citadel miniatures, setting them out on their chosen battlefield, and then playing through a series of what are known as turns. Like most games have. Each turn involves 5 phases of movement and combat. Each miniature has statistics that determine how many inches it can move, what attacks it gets, and the dice rolls needed to be successful. Okay, McCarthy's Man-Crusher Gargant, for example, has a stomping charge that damages adjacent units, but it can only run 8 inches as opposed to the Spite Rider Lancer's 12 inches, which is critical in the seize the objective format the pair are playing. There is no one game size, layout, objective, or narrative. The various universes do not share the same rules, nor do the versions of the game that take place within those universes. When Bad Moon Cafe's co-owner Hugh Wyeth started collecting 2 decades ago, quote, "The rules were so complicated that I don't think I ever actually played a game." And that's a very interesting statement. You got into collecting the minis and painting, but you were discouraged from playing the game because it was too crunchy. Now, this is where we can start to segue into other games, for example, like one-page rules, which obviously I cover a lot on this channel. One of the reasons lots of players gravitate to OPR is it's not as crunchy. The emphasis is on play. Get models on the table, roll dice, blow things up. I know a lot of other players, though, they like the crunchiness. It almost feels like you're really getting down to the nitty-gritty of list building, min-maxing, combo building, stacking units. I can see the allure of that, but I just find it interesting that a guy who eventually opens up a business that's a gaming cafe initially thought the game was too complicated. He continues, and despite McCarthy and Seymour's high skill level, their game is peppered with pauses to refer to rulebooks and statistics sheets. Well, welcome to the game of Warhammer. 2,000 point game. Do you have an evening? At a different table, I hear someone standing around an orc-strewn battlefield say apologetically, "I'll stop asking questions in a second and we can actually start playing." Absolutely. Warhammer is one of those games where after being at the game store with your buddy an hour in, you haven't started playing yet. In fact, you may still be setting up. We got another picture here of, let's see, Deputy Manager of the Bad Moon Cafe holding up a Tau battlesuit and a Space Marine Dreadnought. These pictures are very, very faded. I wonder why they went with that. Okay, continuing on. Some players learn multiple games, others just one. After all, you need different miniatures for each game. That used to not be the case. You used to be able to play, for example, Kill Team with your 40k miniatures, and in some cases you can, but GW then realized, wait, if you can play the same miniatures in multiple games, you don't have to buy more. And that comes back to why the article is written. Why has the company reached such success? Because they found ways to force you to keep buying the same things. But I get ahead of myself. Okay. Which is what makes it an expensive hobby. A starter set of 38 models that would constitute the bare minimum for an engagement costs £70. Bigger models cost more. The beetle-riding Sylvaneth Queen, owned by Seymour, will set you back £105, and that's not including painting supplies. Citadel colors with names such as Poxwalker and Wa Flesh start at $275 for 12 milliliters. Or scenery, a miasmic malignifier, a noxious parasitical furnace costs £42. For those of you who are doing the conversions, you know how expensive GW is. Noxious furnaces notwithstanding, I learned that Warhammer is quite a gentle hobby. Interesting. With its emphasis on strategy enforced by the regular rolling of dice and unfurling of measuring tapes, a typical game plays out more like chess than a first-person shooter. I'm not quite sure what he's getting at here. A gentle hobby? You, sir, have never seen someone throw dice, models, or other things in frustration. And also, plays out more like chess than a first-person shooter. Well, yes? I mean, if we go back to the picture here, who would look at that and say, oh, that looks a lot like Halo? I'm not sure what anyways. Okay, gentle hobby. I don't know if they're trying to compare it to like a sport or weightlifting or something like that where it's very physically demanding, but if the person reading this article hasn't figured out from this picture alone that this isn't a high-contact sport, I don't know what you're doing. Okay. Gentle hobby. Wow, that's one thing I never thought I would hear Warhammer referred to. A gentle hobby. Now, I agree with this. An emphasis on strategy, rolling of dice, measuring tapes. It's like playing chess. Absolutely. In fact, when I've explained this to other people when I say, oh, I play tabletop war games, and they're like, what are those? I say, think of chess, but more complicated. And I have a video about that, too. Okay. At last year's Warhammer conference, Tara B.M. Smith, a research assistant at the University of Sydney, delivered a talk entitled Miniature Mindfulness, Finding Spiritual Flow with Warhammer 40k Figurines. And they have a link to it. I may just have to do another video checking that out. Because here's what academics do, folks. Allow me a little tangent here. What academics do is they take fun things and ruin them. They take history and they nitpick it. They take nuance to the point where you're just begging for some generalities and overarching statements. So I would be curious to see what an academic conference paper about the spiritual flow of 40k minis, not figurines. Maybe we'll have to have another video taking a look at this article. We shall see. For now, let us move on. We've got another picture of the game in action here and another good look control over here. Okay. Many hobbyists never get around to battle at all, spending their time amassing and painting armies instead. Madrid-based professional miniature painter Borja Calvo Bertran de Lis gave up battling some time ago. When I was little, I had a friend that worked at a Games Workshop store. He swept my army away in one turn. Oh, how many of us have had that joy? Tabled on turn one? Yeah, I had that. I didn't play. In fact, I've never played that guy again. And I've had opportunities, and I said, no, I'm not going to play you. He says, so I started to paint and I quit playing. Now, 30, he teaches and paints commissions for collectors and companies full-time, earning for a single piece what he would make in a month when he started out. His entry of a Stormcast Eternal, a warrior riding a giant beast called a Morgriff, to this year's Golden Demon painting competition was the overall winner. The piece was made up of different materials, all rendered in paint, textiles, metals, feathers, rock, bark, snow, and took the artist 300 hours over the course of 5 months to complete. Now, my question is, why don't they show that in this article? Now, nothing wrong. I mean, that's a beautiful orc army. Yellow's difficult to paint. Those are good-looking models, too. But why on earth would you spend this time describing something like this in detail and not show a picture of it? I'm scrolling here. I don't see it. Maybe we'll have to look at it other times. Well, I'm not going to do it here. Who knows what will pop up if I start clicking links here. Okay, so an interesting kind of tangent here that so far what we've heard about is a store owner who says, I didn't think I'd ever play because it's too complicated. A painter who says it was too complicated and I got tired of getting curb stomped, so I started going into painting. It's interesting that the article is pointing out that while it's known for being a game, lots of people don't play, and yet the company is still doing very, very well. So what this article, I think, is trying to point out is this is more than a game, and that's why it brings in so much money. Oh, look at this. Mini Wargaming's in here. Matthew Glanfeld, co-owner of Ontario-based tabletop content creator and collection Mini Wargaming, estimates that he's painted roughly 1,000 miniatures since he started around 2 decades ago. Enough to know that he prefers the collecting and narrative sides of the hobby. Since I was a kid, I was always the game master of our playtime, he says. I think that influences my desire to tell stories more than be competitive with those games. And while I'm not a religious viewer of Mini Wargaming videos, I have seen enough to know that is absolutely true. You watch Matthews, his games are about beautiful tables, fun scenarios, interesting stories. He's not the kind of guy who's going to bring a super competitive list. He'll bring lists that are strong, but he wants to tell a story and have a good time. There are others at Mini Wargaming that are more into the competitive side of it. So another beautiful picture of orcs. I love Iron Jaws. All right, moving on. And we're getting close to the end here, folks. Even competitive Warhammer is convivial. Inside Nottingham's Warhammer World, the biggest public collection of pieces in the UK, dioramas show sieges and skirmishes, meticulously messy clashes of muddy metal and monstrous flesh. Oh, you just love that alliteration, don't you? Rubble, shrapnel, and minuscule shell casings litter the intricately crafted scenes. In the event space, players are encouraged, in a tournament of Kill Team, a Warhammer 40k spin-off, put the K in there for crying out loud. Who's your editor? Spin-off designed around close combat engagements. Not so. It's not close combat engagements. It's small-scale engagements. There's close combat in full games of 40k. Cans of Monster Energy drinks sit around a considered distance from the thousands of pounds worth of miniatures. But there is no prize money on the line, just trophies for painting, playing, and sportsmanship. And the atmosphere is sociable. Many teams are offering tactical advice to their opponents, either to show off their knowledge or just because figuring out the perfect game plan together is more interesting than winning alone. Yeah, perhaps. It depends on the setting. If you're in a hyper-competitive environment, you're not going to give your opponent tips. It's a similar story back at the Bad Moon Cafe, where hundreds of dice rolls and thousands of inches of fastidiously measured movement have brought McCarthy and Seymour's battle to its crescendo. This is a very violent game we're playing. No, it's gentle. You haven't read the article, guys. It's a gentle game. Anyways, McCarthy observes, surveying the miniatures cast to one side. Ah, the dead pile. A dice roll goes in Seymour's favor, and his woodland queen returns from the dead. McCarthy simply doesn't have enough models left to keep up, and Seymour wins. But right until the final hammer blow falls, the pair continue to discuss strategy together. And that absolutely is a big part of this game. Whether you play Warhammer or any other tabletop game, half the fun is the banter, the discussion, the post-game review, talking about where do you think the key moments were, where should you have made different decisions, when was the dice roll the deciding factor, and when was it a decision that you made. So that's not just applicable to Warhammer. As the miniatures reluctantly turn to their bags and boxes, a game of 40k is starting on an adjacent table. A man is teaching a friend how to play the army of space elves he has just acquired after many years away. Whether through nostalgia, new releases, or sheer sunk cost, this is not a hobby that anyone gives up forever. You won't find many casual Warhammer fans, says Andrew, once someone's in, they're in. I'm curious what you guys think of that statement. On the one hand, I understand exactly what he means. When you buy your first army, no one just sticks with one. Nobody. Everyone who starts in not just Warhammer, but any tabletop wargaming hobby will never just collect one army. They can't. There's so much stuff. There's so many cool ideas and looks and fluff and lore and rules and games. You can never just start one. But how does he define casual? To me, casual means non-competitive. So I can collect tons of minis, spend hundreds of hours painting. I still consider myself a casual player because I don't go to tournaments. So if casual means you only play once a month, that still doesn't work because there are people who just don't get to play as much, but they still love the hobby. So I think I get what this individual is saying, that you can't just dip your toe in the hobby, but I think a little more nuance here is called for. Okay, so that's the end of the article. Let's see if there's any comments here. Well, there's a few. We won't read through all of them, but let's see if there's any good stuff here. I picked up Warhammer as a kid. I'm now 26. This hobby is perfect for the current age as it gets you away from screens. I've made that argument before as well. I will sit down and spend 3 to 4 hours not checking my phone, which I rarely ever do. Okay, so 3 to 4 hours, so you're playing one turn of 40K. Got it. But I get what he's saying. Absolutely. This is a great hobby to get people away from screens. Even though, I got to admit, when I'm painting, I usually have my tablet playing something on the side that I'm listening to. Let's see. What else? Articles like this make me realize how very old I have become. So different in my day. We played sports and had girlfriends. Dang, dude. That is harsh. I'll have you know, good sir, that I am married with kids and I still play the hobby. Thank you very much. And as for sports, I'm allergic to physical activity. Don't talk to me. And then I like this. We play sport. We have wives and children. We paint miniature soldiers. So this person's being a bit of a twit. And fortunately, they're getting theirs. Let's see. What keeps the battle raging on? Upper middle class parents. Savage, but true. A world I will never understand nor play, but what a remarkable business. Now, that's a fascinating comment. Because remember, this article was written by the Financial Times. This article is about how was a company that sells toys so successful. Because there's other companies that sell toys, but they're not this successful. What else? We have, I've owned stock for a couple years now. Love it and the company. Well, okay, obviously because you own stock. The company itself, I've made my opinions on them clear previously. Yep, I went hard in and it got a superb return. Again, if you're into business, Games Workshop is fantastic. If you're one of their many customers, increasingly, you develop a serious love-hate relationship with this company. Let's see. Oh, there's lots. We're not going to go through all these. No way. No how. Well, there you have it, folks. An interesting article by a serious financial journal, newspaper, wouldn't call it magazine, I don't know, journal, about what makes a tabletop gaming company such a successful business. And as I've talked about many other times on this channel, they're like Scylla and Charybdis. Like, they're two opposing forces. They're a hobby company, so they want to make games that are fun and hobbies that are enjoyable. At the same time, they're a company and they want to make money. And frequently, they have to sacrifice one for the other. This particular article has praised and shown how the company is more than just selling little pieces of plastic, which is absolutely correct. And that can be true for any other tabletop gaming company. The question is, what has GW done that has made them more successful than Warlord Games, Mantic Games, Corvus Belli, any of these other companies? Is it just a matter of time? Or are there other things that GW has done that has given them that leg up? Or maybe it was just luck. They were one of the first companies when fantasy got started, and they've managed to ride the wave as the genres of fantasy and sci-fi have become more popular. Who knows? So the article, while it had some interesting points, I think there's a lot more that should have been said in there. Anyways, what did you guys think of it? What points does he get right? Where is he a little bit off? Put it down in the comments. And I'll see you on the next video. Until then, keep your dice on the table.